All right, I think we're live. I didn't get the usual notification that we're live, but sometimes it does that. We're operating without a net, so great. Usually there's a little counter that shows up that's like you're live. So,
Great start.
yeah, I know it's awesome. It's awesome. It's a great start. It's a great start. Hello everyone, and welcome to Decoding TV, a podcast about television. I am David Chen, and joining me today, as usual, for this series covering Secret Invasion, he is the co host of Remap Radio and the writer of Crossplay, a new Substack that you can find at patrickklepek.substack.com. Patrick Klepek, welcome back to Decoding TV.
I'm back. I'm still at Substack. I'm still here. Dave hasn't kicked me off yet, and so I'm ready to talk some more.
Despite my best
Secret
efforts.
I know.
Despite my
You're
best
trying.
efforts.
My monitor is attempting to turn off on me and also to trying to kick me off, but I said no. Flicker away. Tornadoes are happening all around me, but nothing will stop me from talking about episodes 3 and 4 of Secret Invasion. Dave, you cannot stop me.
Indeed. Patrick is you're in Chicago area, right? So that's what's causing.
I am. Yes.
Well, anyway, today on Decoding TV, we are going to be discussing episodes 3 and 4 of Secret Invasion, currently streaming right now on Disney Plus. You can find more episodes of this podcast at podcast.decodingtv.com, email us at decodingtv@gmail.com, and find us on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram, and Threads at Decoding TV. We are going to start by talking about non-spoilery overall thoughts about episodes 3 and 4. Then we're going to move into a full detailed recap and bring up any additional topics related to these episodes. So let's get into it, Patrick. Let's start by talking about overall thoughts. At this point, we are more than halfway through the show, and I think we have opinions on the show. Right, we have overall opinions on the show. So, what do you think of Secret? How do you think Secret Invasion is going so far? How do you think the Secret Invasion is going so far?
I think that the secret might be that nobody's watching. Well, I don't know if that's a secret. Maybe that's not a secret. I have to admit, I was really holding out hope. Like a couple of the scenes from episode 2 between Rhodes and Fury, that was maybe going to chart a path for. If not an amazing show, a show that would have enough strong scenes, enough character scenes, because it just became clear pretty early the show is not setting especially high stakes for itself. The show is not setting especially high consequences for the broader universe, and that can be fine. But then what are you doing with the rest of it? Justify your time here and your time with me. And my disappointment comes from the show having, in bullet point form, if you were to explain, here are some of the things we're going to explore in this show. I see the show walking up to that line where it could do some of those things, and then choosing, not even metaphorically, having characters walk out the door and choose not to engage with those topics. Like
literally a character walks out the door at one point instead of
when they say the most having the most meaningful exchange between those characters about the subtext and the text of their relationship. Well, we don't have time for it in this 6-part show. I need to go do a poorly lit action scene with the president. I cannot stay at this table. I think that is where my disappointment lies. It's I don't want to get into spoilers, but a allusion to that is deep fears of mine that I said, I really hope they don't do this one thing. Please don't do this one thing. They did the one thing, which obviously, I don't know if Dan knew or was just of course they're going to do that. And it's please don't do it. And it did it. And I will say, it's hard for me to recommend this show to anyone but the most hey, are you fine with just looking at your phone and watching Nick Fury on screen every once in a while? If that level of show, wow. I mean, look, brutal. you watch a lot of I listen to your stuff. You watch a lot of reality. There are tiers of show. Is the show there to engage you at the highest level? Your phone is down. I am fully on board with everything that's happening. It's okay for a show to not be at that level, but also you should know what you're in for and what your level of engagement is. I just think this show rarely captures, demands, or requires that level of attention. And maybe sometimes that's a really high bar to ask of something like the MCU. But there are moments like the conversations between Vara and Fury that gesture at like a much more like
Yeah,
where's the
yeah.
entire episode set in
Right.
1998 about the two of them? Like
Yeah, yeah.
they clearly got up to some adventures. Like you telling me that she's got this clandestine group of scrolls up to stuff and he's off finding Captain America and whatever, and that like you couldn't build a show about them in love with like it's right there. And I think that's my frustration is the where it chooses to point its camera at is frequently some of the least interesting work that I want to see. And then it walks into the door quite as in like quite literally to moments that I'd want to spend 25 minutes with, and we get a couple before the show says, we got that whole plot thing to deal with though. That plot over there. Do you want to go back to the plot? I guess. And that's kind of where I'm at the show. And especially now as we get to episodes 5 and 6, which if we're following the arc of basically everything else in Marvel shows, Marvel movies, or just comic shows, or just action in general, we're trending towards the climax, which is a lot more shooting and powers and things of that nature. And it feels like we're going to leave behind even the little bits that I've been kind of grasping onto so far.
Uh, Agreed with most of what you said. The only thing I'm confused by is your point about there not being enough stakes. Oh, I guess the annihilation of the human species is not enough stakes for you, Patrick Klepek.
Well, when it's the
What's going on
stakes,
there?
well, what's in this? It's I don't believe them. That's what I don't believe them. I don't believe you. I don't mean to be as naive as Talos, who really shows his inability to grasp the seriousness of like the situation throughout this show. Just a complete disregard. Like this character is just gutted throughout the conclusion of where we're at in the series. But that's it. It's like I don't believe the stakes of the show. You can tell me that humanity is at stake, but multiple times now, and I don't want to spoil how episode 4 ends, but we're getting repeats. There are 3 moments in this show that it tries to impart gravity with a character deploying a specific technique, let's call it. And
Wow.
in every
Wow.
instance,
Uh-huh.
we've had we haven't had a conversation about these yet because some of these occur over the episodes in question, but I didn't believe them anytime. It's like BS show. Like I just know whatever you're telling me I'm supposed to be upset about, like we're gonna resolve it by the next episode. And so I guess I just don't grasp by or sit in with the stakes. And I'm primed to sort of be able to like I love these types of movies. I don't need a lot to get over the hump. Like I can go wink wink nod nod with the best of them. And I just don't think that this show is earning that from me. And once you lose those stakes, it's like the rest of the show doesn't have enough to support you on the way down.
Uh, I got an email this week, Patrick.
Mhm.
That was someone. It was a not a nice email. From someone
Oh,
at
I'm sorry.
decodingtv@gmail.com, and they basically said, "Hey, David Chen, why don't you choose people that will like the shows that you're reviewing?" And
No.
I just want to make clear,
No.
I just want to make clear that when I was working with Patrick, like I didn't just Patrick Klepek that was not randomly assigned Secret Invasion. We were like, hey, Patrick, you're like, oh, I love MCU stuff. I've watched every single TV show. Um,
100%.
I choose people who are inclined to like the thing, but if they don't like the thing, like I can't control it. I can't control it, right? That said, I will share my thoughts on these 2 episodes. I mean, I think it's clear that the show is not great at this point. But what it feels to me like a lot of these shows have in common. Honestly, the show that this reminds me most of is Captain Falcon and Winter Soldier, or Captain America and
Yeah.
Winter Soldier, right? Where
Yeah.
basically it has all these different ideas that it's chasing. It's like, oh, we got to continue some of the MCU stuff, right? So Nick Fury, why was he in space and all that stuff? We got to continue that. But what about if shape shifting aliens infiltrated the highest ranks of the government? Oh, that's interesting. What about Nick Fury's wife? Maybe Nick Fury was married this whole time. Ooh, Talos, he has an interesting, it feels like it's like squirrel, like, oh, we have all these interesting things to go and try and figure out. Now, look, uh, it is still a pleasure to see Samuel L. Jackson on screen. We get to see Samuel L. Jackson and Don Cheadle interact in the MCU, which basically nowhere else in the MCU provides us, as far as I understand, other than this show. So it's like that's genuinely pleasure. Episode 4 had some, in my opinion, solid action. You know, and so the show is not like irredeemable or anything like that.
No.
But I think the idea that it would like be one of the best MCU TV shows or whatever, like it feels increasingly unlikely that that will happen at this point.
And I want to clarify. So we did have that conversation ahead of me joining you to review this, and so I feel bad that I'm just leaning in
No, no,
or
no worry. I
affirming
don't.
this
I don't
person to me an
expect you
email.
to. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Go
But
ahead.
what I want to say is, this comes from a place of high expectation. I think there
Yeah.
has been a trend in, if you look at like reviews, critical reviews of like of Marvel stuff in the last 18 months, post Endgame especially. I think there has been a mixture of, yes, a real roller coaster of quality in terms of the product that is coming out, the stories that are being told, alongside a general just exhaustion from critics to want to even engage with these works, period. Because I think a tension that's occurring, and I can speak to this as someone that has only recently gotten on sort of like the crowd-funded like content creation business, for like to use the crassest possible terms.
Wow.
But when I worked at
Wow.
Vice and all my other stops along the way, I was thinking of traffic, I was thinking of SEO, and there is an inherent mandate to interact with Marvel comic book films because they are big. For for a while we're making a lot of money. Less so perhaps these days in a more
Yeah.
consistent basis. But I do think though these works have been uh kind of become a punching bag because a lot of critics are just tired of having to review them as a perfunctory part of their job. And I do not come from that world. I do not come to disliking or having a lot of disappointment with Secret Invasion from, well, gee, it's like I always have to wake up and talk to Dave Chen about the new Marvel thing. It's like, no, like I'm watching these shows already. Like this is what my wife and I like. It is the reason we go to the movies is mostly to watch a new Marvel movie because we got to get a babysitter and pay for tickets. It's a whole hubbub. It was one of our great disappointments to not go see the most recent, very good one of those, Guardians of the Galaxy, because my daughter got hand, foot, and mouth disease like right as that was happening, and so we had to cancel the babies. And so I just do want to like put a little context in the arc of me arriving at the show.
Yeah.
Disappointing me is like it's because I want this stuff to be great, and I can see a world where this could have been maybe not great, but much better than it was. And so I'm constantly grasping at like those little tendrils that I can in the show. And I think that it ends up expressing itself, I think, in line with a broader sort of like just tiredness with Marvel as a brand, as a franchise. But I
Mhm.
personally do not come and arrive at that place from that same space.
Patrick Klepek comes not to tear Marvel down, but to raise it up.
I demand
Okay?
better.
Yeah.
Demand better.
Demand better, indeed. Well, okay. Those are our overall thoughts about these middle two episodes of Secret Invasion. Episode 3, Betrayed, and episode 4, Beloved. Let's get to a more detailed recap, which we will then follow up with some specific topics we may want to discuss. The topics may come up as part of the recap as well, but let's get into it. So we're not going to spoil episode 3. Let's start with episode 3, Betrayed. This episode opens with Gravik's group putting plans into motion for their next attack, infiltrating the UK's Royal Navy, attacking a United Nations plane via submarine, and sending the world into chaos. Gravik then reveals his secret research into Super Skrulls, a way of manipulating Skrull DNA to gain powers. We then venture into the past with a scene between a young Nick Fury and a Skrull named Vara, who will later become his wife. Back in the present, Fury and Vara spar over Fury's disappearance at the hand of Thanos and later his retreat into space. The events left Vara distraught, and while it's clear Vara's heart remains with Fury, her allegiances are unclear. While Gravik searches for a traitor in his group's midst, he meets up with Talos, who threatens to undermine Gravik's plans by revealing the presence of the Skrulls to the world. Gravik believes this would lead to the eradication of the Skrulls, while Talos believes humanity would understand the difference between good and bad Skrulls. While later having breakfast, a newly fired Fury approaches Talos and reluctantly asks for help. The two arrive at the home of a Skrull hiding as a Royal Navy officer, seeking a launch termination code. The interrogation goes poorly, and Talos ultimately shoots the traitor Skrull when pressed about Gaia's loyalties. Talos calls Gaia for help, and after she retrieves the code from the memories of the human version of the officer in Gravik's base, the attack is aborted. Knowing she's about to be caught, Gaia attempts to flee before Gravik confronts her and shoots her in the chest. So that is where that episode ended. And I have to say, I watched episodes 3 and 4 straight through. So I did not spend a week wondering if Gaia was dead.
Well,
Uh,
I didn't spend a week. I watched them as they came out, and I did not spend a week wondering if Gaia was dead.
well, that is your problem, Patrick Klepek. Uh, so this episode I thought was like the weaker of the two episodes,
I agree.
and I think one of the issues that this show is really having is in the build up to some of these big set pieces. So the idea of episode 3 is you're infiltrating this guy's uh, house, and he has like the nuclear launch, or he's giving the order, or so he's responsible for giving the order to fire the missile. Blah blah blah. Is it just me, or did it feel like pretty freaking casual? Like the conversation that Nick Fury has with Olivia Colman's character. He's like, "Hey, I need you to give me the." And she's like, "Okay, fine, yeah, I'll send it via email." Like, there's no like urgency or build up to it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
It's
like
very clear if this plane goes down. Like the chaos element that Gravik is speaking is going to happen, and whatever she is dealing with, like she can't spare a couple agents to go meet up with them, like go on the back, and they can a pincer move on the house to give them a
she's like,
couple
yeah,
hours.
whatever, it's fine. Like it's cool. Like, but it just this is there for some shows this would be the culminating event of the season, like
Yes.
building up to like this nuclear launch and figuring out a way to like stop it from happening. But instead, it's just like, oh, oh yeah, okay, I guess we stopped that one. Good job. So I think that's a real problem with the show is that you like I think you basically find out about the plan at the beginning of the episode, right? So like you're learning about the plan and then it is being resolved by the end of the episode. And it's supposed to have like world altering stakes.
That's
And
the show writ large, Dave.
yeah,
Like that is actually for a mystery show. The show resolves a lot of its mysteries up front, like in the premise, right? Like we learn so much about Gravik, his intentions, what the planet altering stakes are so early that like the like knockdown effect reveals that are happening as we go along. I mean, yes, would it be sort of silly to have a show that we're spending the whole time guessing like who is a scroll? But that sounds like that might be more fun than where we've like ended up. And I just feel like the show in some ways it wanted to like reveal Gravik and the intentions of Gravik up front, make them a central character from the beginning, as opposed to like a big bad to be revealed behind a curtain later. And I get that, but we also don't spend enough time with Gravik and the base and the other characters to really. This show through Talos is attempting to argue if the show has like a broader sort of like theme that it's like really like it's exploring through Talos is can the Skrulls and humans get along? And obviously, Gravik is saying, no, we should just take this planet for ourselves. And Talos believes, I think rather naively, that there's a path forward here. And if you're going to do a perspective show, like I need more time understanding the perspective of Gravik. And the time that we do spend with him and his intentions is more or less just around like a mustache twirling, like, time to destroy the world with my super Skrulls, as opposed to I like in this show
yeah,
is a very understandable, maybe not killing 2,000 people in a Paris attack, understandable, but understandable tension with people who have been asked to work for the American government with under a different skin. They cannot even be their real selves.
yeah,
And to do that for decades under the promise of being accepted or at least sent somewhere where they can build their own home and society. And it's so easy to imagine being in the writer's room and in the same way that you're talking about all these threads we can pull on, it's like, that sounds like really rich textual territory for a television show
hmm
that would just be surface level premise for a movie to get you to the MacGuffin. And here, it's like I can describe all of these interesting angles, and I just don't feel like they end up getting explored, and that ends up being, I think, undercutting. All right, I mean, I think I almost wrote, I don't know if I wrote it in the write-up that I gave to you, but I almost wrote like, and here's yet another plan to sow chaos from Gravik, because like
Yeah.
there is a bit of like a chaos of the week element
Yes.
to it.
Yes. They made it into a procedural. Like it's a graphics plan of the week, basically.
Yeah, yes,
Which is
right,
not
and
which is I don't think is a good approach for this kind of thing, right?
no, and like the fact that the Gaia is like immediately revealed to like in episode 4, like not like they're undercutting Gravik even as like this mad evil like villain. Like I just don't buy him. I don't buy his plan, and because of the formulaic nature of the sort of like chaos of the week. What? How are our heroes going to get out of it this time? And it's like, well, of course they get out of the jam, and so I just don't buy a lot of that. And also, like we related to even understanding their perspectives. I wish we spent more time seeing the infiltration element, like the whole notion of like being a scroll, like getting your way into the government. That seems like that could be interesting and tense. And we get basically none of that. It's sort of just a magic plot device to just insert them into places where they can execute their plan, as opposed to seeing any sort of the insertion element of that. Like, how are they getting the bodies out? Like,
Well,
et
I think the
cetera, et
approach
cetera.
can be best summarized by the scene early in the episode where the scrolls are in the car and one of them says, "Time to transform," and then cut to they have been transformed. And it's like I actually wrote down in my notes. I was like, "Oh, that's a nice way to save money on the transformations." They can just
I do
say,
think Dan was right in the previous episode that you can almost feel the writers and the actors finding ways to not want to sit in the makeup chair for what was clearly must be just an enormous amount of
"Yeah,
work.
enormous."
Like because, especially that scene I think in episode 2 when Gravik is presenting his plan to the council, and they're who's a human, like why are they not in their scroll like forms when they're talking, like they're in the council, why are we in our human forms? And it's probably because they don't want to do an entire day's worth of shooting in that makeup.
Well, I mean, to be fair, they do explain. There is an in-universe explanation for it, which is in the first episode. They're like, "Oh, we keep our human forms because that makes it easier to stay in them or whatever." So
Okay, all right,
yeah,
sure, okay,
yeah.
yeah,
So
okay,
there you
all right,
go.
you're right, you got
Yep,
me, you got
I
me,
got you.
undercut,
I
undercut.
am monitoring the canonical aspects of this so closely, Patrick. All right, there's much more to discuss in episode 4, so let's get to that. Episode 4, beloved or beloved. Gaia is revealed to have previously stolen the Super Scroll DNA, allowing her body to heal. So let's just stop. Let's pause right there. Boy, what a fake out! They faked you out, Patrick. Huh? They faked you
You
out.
know, in episode 1, when when the death occurs at the end of that with Hill, it's really dramatic. Like they're really hammering Hill, like hammering. I did not mean hammering
Mhm.
home.
Yeah,
That Hill, like when they do like they're
yeah.
doing like an overhead shot, slowly come out. The music is swelling. Yes, like this is a comic book franchise. Anybody can come back. But they did seem to be really trying to impart to you, the audience member, like, look at that dead body. Like, we're giving you a big panning shot of that,
Yeah.
and trying to impart like some gravity to the moment, even though obviously by existing in this universe, the watcher is always going to be thinking, well, couldn't they come back because of XYZ? And the shots they do here, I just didn't. Yeah, we saw her go down. My wife and looked at each other. Well, she's clearly just gonna get up again the next
Really? Wow. You didn't buy it for
episode.
a second. You didn't buy it for a
No, now,
second. Yeah.
I mean, that's also the problem of like, you mentioned before that Amelia Clark has not really been in much since Game of Thrones. Like, well, they're not just gonna shoot her on the side of the road in
Would have been bold.
episode 3.
Would have been
Um,
bold. Would have been
and
bold if they
and
did it.
that would have
So
been bold. It's not what they it's not what they did. It also would have been poor storytelling. It was like, I feel like this character, if you're gonna have her here, has more to say. And I do think they set her up with some interesting tension with her father. Whether that pays off is unclear to me. We haven't. I think that's something we'll see in episodes 5 and 6. But yeah, she seemed very primed for, she's just going to get up for XYZ reason. And so I didn't buy into any of the tension at episode 3. And so I wasn't even mad at the beginning of episode 4. It was more just, yeah, of course. Like, of course she's still going to be here doing something else.
All right, so we jump to 2012, aka the same year as the Battle of New York depicted in the original Avengers movie. At dinner, Vara teases Fury about what happened before the two express their love for another while discussing a book of poems by Raymond Carver. Side note, by the way, wasn't clear to me if they were married at this point, right, or if they're still
Mm-mm.
courting or whatever. But yeah, didn't know if you had a different vibe. Back in the present, Vara meets with James Rhodes at a church service where we learn, whoa, plot twist. Rhodes has been a scroll for an undetermined amount of time and tasks Vara with killing Fury. So, first of all, I just want to say, let's give props where props are due. The scroll version of Rhodes, uh, it was taking a shower in the episode, and I was like, wow, the makeup is good. Like, I can imagine it being difficult to have makeup for
Yeah.
scrolls that is able to survive water. So good job on the makeup show. That was my reaction to that scene. But yeah, apparently Rhodes has been a scroll for how long? Like, who knows? We know that scrolls can kill people and take over their lives. So was Rhodes always a scroll? Was he a scroll
I
for the last X years?
Yeah.
You know,
I
like I
have
didn't.
no I have no
It's
idea.
unclear, right?
I assume they're sort of setting up yes, they obviously they could kill someone and assume their face, their body, their form. But because like so often the show is like referencing back to this base full of humans that are like on the like whatever
Yeah,
stasis pods that they're in, and then you can access their memories through a hand portal
yeah.
sort of device. I assume he's just there like in that rack, and we just that is just not a shot that we have seen in the show.
I
I
see.
will
I see. So
say,
you think like Don Cheadle, real Don Cheadle Rhodes is somewhere in some kind of rack somewhere.
yeah, yes, yeah,
Okay,
I don't think
gotcha.
I don't think he's dead.
Interesting. Interesting.
Perhaps I mean I assume I assume they just I mean he has that Armored Wars movie that's coming in the next couple of years, and I assume Skrull Rhodes is not the star of that, though that would be a bold turn to just have an entire film with a Skrull version of that character. But I will say, looking, even though I remain disappointed that the first time we get Samuel Jackson and Don Cheadle acting off one another, it is with a like not non Rhodes version of that character, given the kinds of things those characters are talking about, like and
Right.
like the history of black men and black power is just someone
Yeah. I
faking
mean,
that conversation.
in our last episode, didn't you say, "Hey, if
Yeah,
Rhodes turns out to be a scroll, that completely undermines the potency of the conversation they had?" Right? If I
it
recall correctly.
does. And I continue to feel that like oh right, we have these two powerful black actors like talking about earning black power, and like what do you do with that? And it's like wow, but he was a green guy all along. You know, putting that aside, which I am bothered
Unless,
by.
unless, unless he's been Rhodes for like decades, which is like
That's
possible in
true.
this world, right?
That is I guess
And
that
then
is
it's
true.
like he needs to navigate being a black man and also a scroll for many
Right.
years. So,
The
but
thing is
it's
though,
unclear. It's unclear.
I feel like the first tell the show is giving us that that is probably not the case was when Rhodes goes to that meeting with the other countries to explain Fury and Hill being in Paris. And he has that moment where it's like the Netherlands or someone is mouthing off to him, and he turns around and he's like, I'm gonna get in the war suit and like mess that lady up. There's a line that goes
He threatens to bomb Slovakia, if I recall correctly.
yeah, and that felt aggressive. Like granted, like Cheadle has played that character being like kind of like he's capable of cracking jokes, but that like that seemed a little like, huh, like you're saying that in an official setting in which like clearly people could probably hear you. It wasn't like it was just off mic, and I sort of took that to maybe mean is that the mask sort of slipping on that character for the but I
Right.
think it would be more interesting if it was a scroll assuming Rhodes for many films,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
much of this is a scroll like that will be a worthwhile turn for that character, and I think would, to your point, help massage my own uncomfortableness with like the way like that conversation with Fury and Rhodes, because then it still has weight if this person has had to assume like and work through all these prejudices around them as a result of assuming that face.
Absolutely. Um, Does the show explain that to us? Not yet. You
Not
know,
yet. Not
maybe
yet.
it's possible we'll get an explanation by the end of the season.
I hope
So,
so.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Also, loved that I'm a sucker for Raymond Carver, man. I was like, and when I
Hmm.
was watching this, I was like, wow, this is really giving us. When I was watching Vara and Nick Fury interact in the past, I was thinking to myself, wow, this is really giving us a look into what an alternate version of this show would have been. You know,
Yes.
where it's like, imagine if it was just conversations with Fury and Vara throughout the years. Like that, if that's the whole show, I would have been super happy with that. That's like, oh,
Oh, just
that's
make it a
cool.
one-off limited series. The episodes are
Yeah,
8 minutes long. It's
yeah.
just them at a coffee shop.
Doesn't even need to
Them.
be 8 minutes, but it's like it can be like play like, it's just like, hey, this is like a chamber piece now. No one, like, very few people would watch that, but here's the thing: are people
We'd
really
recap
watching?
that show. We
Yeah,
have a lot to talk about.
absolutely. Are people really watching Secret Invasion in its current form? Is the question. Like, but yeah, when anyone quoting Raymond Carver, I think these two actors have a lot great chemistry with each other. So,
Absolutely.
I love the work they're doing. Okay. But yeah, back in the present, Vera meets with James Rhodes, and we learned that he tasks Vera with killing Fury, and it's like the problem with this whole plot is, we can get into this more later. Is I think we are given tantalizingly few snapshots of Fury and Vera's past, and so. Well, yeah, let's get into it later. We'll get into it later when we
Mhm.
get to that point when she needs to actually betray him. Okay, so elsewhere, Gravik reveals Gaia is the mole and she's dead. And he moves forward with yet another plan to sow chaos, pretend to be the
Well,
Russians and assassinate
there's
the
where I put
American.
the yet
Yeah,
another. There's
yeah.
where I knew I had it in there somewhere.
Yet another plan to sow chaos, pretend to be the Russians and assassinate the American president. Let's pause for a moment, and
Mhm,
I
mhm.
I want to say that you ever watch 24, the Kiefer Sutherland show?
At one of my all-time favorite shows. Got to
Love it.
got to go to the 24 press event for the show. Got to meet Kiefer
Wow,
Sutherland and ask him as I was turning 21 what I should have for my first official drink for my
amazing,
birthday. I He paused for a long time, told this story about a drink that he had seen in the old like 50s Batman show that Batman and Robin would drink, and he begged his mom over and over to get it for him, and she wouldn't because she was like, "It's disgusting. I know they drink it in the show, but you're not." And finally, his mother relented, went and got it, brought it home, and it was disgusting, and he hated it. And so he looks at me, he's like, "This is all to say, drinking is very personal. You're going to have to kind of figure it out for yourself, just like anything else in life." And then he pauses again and goes, "But whiskey." I was like, "Oh, thank you, Mr. Sutherland."
Look, 24, in my opinion, is a very conservative leaning show. Like, there's
100%.
a very
Yes.
there's a very like George W. Bush ideology embedded in that show.
Pro torture.
Yeah, very very pro torture. But here's how a given season of 24 was structured. Okay, you'd have a terrorist attack about to go off within like the next 8 to 12 hours. Right. Each season was in real time, so every episode was 1 hour. Can you believe they used to make 24 of these a year, Patrick Klepek? Incredible,
No.
right?
I mean, they were, you must have been shooting three-fourths of the year just to put
Right.
those out.
And like every episode was in real time, so every episode represented 1 hour, and for the most part, it worked. Like in terms of, hey, you have 1 hour to do this task, and they had multiple they had an A plot, a B plot, sometimes even a
Mhm.
C plot each episode. Um, but what I really appreciated about 24 was sometime in around the 8 to 12 to 14 hour mark each season. Kiefer Sutherland would solve the problem. Like
Mhm.
he would, because it's like there's a terrorist attack, and they know that they can't like extend out that attack for a full 24 hours. So he needs to solve the problem, and then what turns out there is another bomb, Patrick. Right? That is always what happened. Like 2/3 of the season is like, oh my god, there's another bomb. We're gonna spend the next 8 hours trying to fix the other bomb. Right?
And I
That's
couldn't
when
wait. I was like, "I'm so glad there's another bomb."
they have two bombs going off within 24 hours. That's what it is, right? That's what 24 is. Um, I could not help but think of 24 when watching Secret Invasion,
Mhm.
because Gravik has, in the first 4 episodes, 3 distinct terror plots, right?
Mhm.
One is to blow up that Moscow public square where he killed, again, shockingly high number of people, 3,000. Then there's the launching the missile at the UN delegation plane. And now there's killing the American president. So he's really ramping up to the final boss level. Um, but so I have no opposition to the concept of, like, a guy has multiple terror plans, like
Yeah.
in the show's universe. But the build up, Patrick,
Yeah.
right? Like, for 24, you'd have literally 14 hours of build up for one of
Yes.
those plots, right?
And
And
you
then,
end
like,
up you'd spend so much time with the villains and
yes,
the B and the C characters. I mean, like,
yes,
24 is a show that gets lauded, appropriately for its ability to, like, build tension for an action show that had constant commercials.
yeah,
That's difficult to do. But it also had, like, pretty meaningful character development for, like, all of its characters up and down the spectrum. Like, I can tell you personal feelings about multiple presidents in that show.
absolutely, absolutely.
And that is I think it's an overlooked part of what made that show work within that structure that it was operating in.
Yeah, and I think it's a real challenge that this show has of making it's like, we find out, oh, he's planning to kill the president. All right, and then by the end of the episode, the thing has
And do
been
it like the Russians do. Like, what do
but
you what?
do it like we're gonna dress like them. We're gonna talk like them. Although Gravik's not gonna change his appearance, that might have helped a little bit. But
And also, if
uh,
any of their soldiers die, they turn into green goblins. I'm not to like, but you know what I mean? Like, literally, if any
to
one
quote,
of Gravik's soldiers dies, all of a sudden there's a green alien on the battlefield.
mhm.
I feel
To
like that would
quote,
raise some questions about this event and the chaos that it might create.
to quote Kendall Roy, it's a high wire act on a straight razor. I think is what he's, like, clearly the order of difficulty is very hard. But hey, Patrick Klepek, Gravik does not make plans to sow chaos and destruction because they are easy.
Mhm,
He makes plans to sow chaos and destruction because they are hard. So,
mhm, mhm, mhm.
putting that out there. Okay. But yeah, not enough build up to any one of these plans. Like, in my opinion. Every episode is just like, hey, here's a plan, and it's done, and here's a way we're gonna get Nick Fury on site of that. Like,
Yeah,
that's what it is. So yeah,
yeah. The way they get him there is off. It's very convenient in retrospect. Yeah, I didn't really put all. Now that you lay it out that way, Dave. Like, it does seem all a little silly.
he has. Well, he has different. To be fair, the show does make up creative ways for him to be on site. So, like,
Yeah, I
in
actually
the first,
thought the way they get Fury and Talos to this site. Look,
in
throw the logic out, but, like, it's fun. Like, it was a
yeah,
very enjoyable way to get them there.
in the first episode, he plants a bug in Olivia Colman's
Yeah.
office.
And when she's so mad taking it, that was a good payoff. Like, I
Yeah,
did enjoy her futzing with that and being
yeah,
mad after she discovered it was like
that was
in
nice.
a
Yeah, that
show
was
with
nice.
not a ton of, like, setup and payoffs.
Right.
Like, that was a pretty good low stakes one.
In the third episode, she sends Nick Fury an email with the location of the terrorist attack. So that's how he gets to it in the third episode.
Encrypted, I hope. Just end to end.
And in the fourth episode, he implants a scroll with tracking liquid. Basically, is what happens right in
Mhm.
the fourth episode. So, it's making up different ways for him to figure out a way to be on site when each of these terrorist attacks occur. I will say, I understand why people are suspicious of Nick Fury, who conveniently happens to be on site whenever, like, a major terrorist attack is about to unfold. So, even though he's trying to stop it, guys, he's not part of it.
Mhm.
Okay. In a conversation between newly healed Gaia and Talos, Gaia asks her father what she plans to do about Fury's failed plans to provide the Skrulls with a new home. At which point, Talos argues that taking down Gravik will give them leverage with the humans. Maybe, I think it might be Talos, by the way. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this. At which point, Talos argues that taking down Gravik will give them leverage with the humans to ask for favor. Amnesty. Gaia rejects Talos's naive plan for peace and walks away. I just want to say Talos's plan sucks. Like,
What a dumbass. Like, what are we doing here?
well, well, it's not even that the plan is bad. It's just that it literally, when the performance is like he extemporized the plan, right? She's like, "Okay, what's your plan?" And he's like, "Okay, well, gonna stop a bunch of these terrorist attacks, and then when I tell the president, hey, look at all these
You're
terrorist
gonna owe
attacks I
me a
stopped,
favor.
he's gonna owe me one." And it's like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, I, as the viewer, am not even convinced by what you're saying.
Look,
So,
Ben
how?
Mendelsohn can only do so much, Dave. He is capable of selling. I watched him, hunt down, a creature of the dark in what was the HBO show he was in, the King one,
Oh, yeah,
The Outsider.
The
Great
Outsider.
show.
Oh, amazing show. Yeah,
Love The Outsider, and
love that
it
show.
really it made me so excited for him to be in the Marvel universe because I was like, oh man, you're really good at this genre stuff. Like you can just say whatever, and I'm like, I believe you. And he could not. I was laughing. What are you laughing at? I was like, are you watching the scene,
It
wife?
looks
Like
it
what are you
looks like he
like?
literally like made it up on the spot. He's like, "What's your plan?" And he's like, okay,
Oh
well,
shit!
oh, we'll start by doing." And I'm like, what is this? Like,
And that it's and well, he does that. He has a much more aggressive version of that when he has the conversation with Gravik in the museum, in which they discuss, hey, like if you can go forward with whatever plan you want, you go sow another chaos, but like I'm going to
so another
tell,
chaos.
I
Go
go
to the
tell, I'm gonna
chaos
go.
factory and pick up another chaos on
I
the way
don't know.
home.
There's a lot happening in that research back at the base. I don't know. There's a whole line of chaos happening, and he says like, I will just reveal there's a million of us here, and but granted, in that conversation, Gravik set up as the villain, even though they're trying to do like shades of like you can understand his position. He's like, you will create a genocide. They will just hunt us down and eradicate us. And then he says, Talos says, well, I mean, they'll know who the good ones are, like me. And like I again, like on paper, I can understand like having this perspective, this like naive sort of like person who has assimilated, that has found fury and
Right.
believes it is possible for their people to fully assimilate, or at least integrate, like by adopting the faces of their hosts, as he keeps calling them, and find a way to exist alongside them. And I keep waiting for that to get chipped away, because it seems like that's an ideology that the whole show is basically saying over and over, that is untenable. Like it is maybe possible for you to live here, but like to act as though it won't be with meaningful tension is naive. And you should have enough evidence at this point that that is not possible. And so for this character, especially where we end up with them at the end of 4, like if that truly is the end of the line for this character, that's a bummer place for their arc to end, and then I guess be picked up by Gaia, who in some she has sympathies for her father, but disagrees with his intentions on how to play it out. But then Gravik is too far. So centrist Gaia, where do we end up with you? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think the politics of the show are really challenging in a bad way. I don't mean challenging like I'm challenged by them.
Mhm.
I think they're not great. There's a great video that I will link to in the podcast show notes, that I also sent to you this week, about
Mhm.
how um, the show kind of traffics in rather anti-Semitic tropes. Specifically, the idea that a group of shape-shifting aliens have infiltrated the highest levels of the government and are controlling world events.
Come on, I've
Th-
never heard that
th-
one before,
that is a
Dave.
combination. That is a combination of multiple like
Uh-huh.
anti-Semitic. Like that's the problem, is that they combine two anti-Semitic tropes together.
Yep.
If it was just one, it's like, oh, maybe that would still be bad, but it's like, oh,
Yeah.
like maybe that was an accident or something. But it's
Or
like,
demonstrate you know what you're doing with that, right?
right,
Like,
right,
which is
exactly.
like,
They're
look,
like, oh,
we're
we're invoking it and we're subverting it, which is what Captain Marvel did, in my opinion.
right.
It's like,
Correct.
hey, the shapeshifting aliens, you think they're bad? They're actually the good guys. Like that was,
Yep.
um, but the idea that they're mixing both of them together in this, uh, and the problem is that Marvel in general, and certainly Marvel TV shows, rarely have a more complex ideology than bad guys versus good guys, right? Like Gravik is bad and evil, and Ben Mendelsohn is good and Nick Fury is good, and maybe Guy is a little bit in between, but she's eventually going to come to the Ben
Yeah, we
Mendelsohn
know
Nick
she's
Fury side,
gonna work with Fury. Like
right?
if her father truly is dead, then like she is the stand-in character for that role. Who maybe would be more she'd pick up a gun alongside Fury a little more than her father might. But I mean, the Marvel universe in general has appropriated complexity frequently, thematically, in order to like give the appearance of a more
Yeah,
complicated work than it is. And when it's doing that knowingly, uh, it can be okay. But and I think Black Panther is like the rare example of a film. I think its politics at the end can get pretty complicated, but like
right.
it knows what it's playing with, and it's
Yes,
playing with it
yes.
with intentionality. And then you can disagree on where it lands, and that's
You
totally
you can
fair.
disagree on whether a movie called Black Panther should have ended with a CIA guy being a hero of the film. Like
Yeah,
that's
that and like opening like an education district, like and like that. Like I
right,
mean, there's
right.
like
Yeah, there's a
hundred
lot you can
percent.
mess with, but
It's a choice, and it's like I understand. I can see the through line from the argument that it's making in the politics of its work here. That it does to feel like it's just thematic appropriation to give the appearance of complexity without fully working through the implications of that. It doesn't have an opinion on any of these things. It's more just it's much like when people like, and I love the Winter Soldier, right? But like calling that like a Cold War spy thriller, like you're just appropriating like a more complex genre to explain like just a really well done action film, and that's fine. And I just feel like that it gets into really complicated territory when you're talking about exactly what you're talking about, Dave, where it's like, hey, it's one thing to like kind of like appropriate complexity of genres and like plot structure.
right.
But when you start talking like depictions of people that are like deeply coded in conspiracy theory and hate, it's very easy for your show to then end up appropriated by the folks who would look at that as, and I haven't seen a lot of, example of that happen with
Yeah,
Secret
I
Invasion,
haven't
but
I
you
haven't either, but I think I love the concept of it. There's cultural appropriation and complexity appropriation, or thematic appropriation. It's like we're borrowing the appearance of feeling like we're complicated, but we're not really. And that's the problem. Is like Marvel is telling relatively simple stories in a very very complex world. And so far, there's little evidence that the show wants to engage with the kind of complexity that it's introducing with this idea that there's shape-shifting aliens infiltrating the highest levels of government, right? So,
Mhm.
um, so that's that. I'll just say it makes for very awkward viewing because you're dealing with a show that has these like very heavy tropes that have been deployed in horrifying ways before, but it doesn't seem to even know that that's the case. It reminds me, very different situation, but it reminds me of I read an essay once about like Danny Boyle's Yesterday, which is about this movie that where somebody wakes up and he's the only person that knows that the Beatles existed. So he tries to like recreate all the Beatles' songs. But it's like if the Beatles never existed, literally the entire pop culture landscape would be different. Like the way
Mhm.
the music industrial industry would be different. And it's like the movie doesn't address any of those things at all. And it's like it's and the way the essay, I think it was in the New Yorker, that put it was like, it's not even that it doesn't answer the questions. It doesn't even feel like it knows that it asked the question. Right? Like that's kind of how I feel about this show. Is like it
Yeah.
doesn't even know, doesn't even feel like it knows that it has presented a complex and problematic situation, like anyway. Um so we'll see. Maybe it's all gonna land it in the end, Patrick. But I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think it's gonna land that particular plot line
No,
in
I
an
think
interesting.
not.
But yeah, I think we'll all see where this is going. Right? You put it well. Guy is gonna become like on like she's gonna be so moved by the death of her father that she's gonna go over to Ben Mendelsohn's side, and it's gonna be again like good versus evil. There's the good guys, the bad guy. Gravik is bad. He wants to kill too many people so he can have a homeland, and that's bad. You know, which again, pretty Re- Echoes of the real world in there that feel very uncomfortable to me.
Well,
Without,
and
yeah.
they one thing that's not that it goes it's just mentioned as a throwaway, but in the scene in episode 2 between Fury and Talos, there's mention of when Talos puts out a call for the rest of his people to come to Earth wherever they've been hiding in different corners. There's also mention that like there is like a society or like some people have stayed in some other place. I'm forgetting exactly how it's described, but like there is people scattered and hidden, and then some people have like stopped in one tribe or like one area,
Mhm.
and it just kind of goes unremarked on. And I'm curious, especially in given that so much of this is about a home. It's like, all right, well, if there is like one place, maybe it's not a planet, but clearly some people have aligned themselves with some part of the scrolls to try and build something. I don't know, like it's all that stuff that I feel like the show is just not giving us enough just foundational information of like the basic whys of how we've arrived here that makes I think that even that makes it hard to buy into the various arguments from the various factions of just okay but what like there are basic questions I think just haven't been answered about how we even arrive at this moment even at the end of episode 4 that then makes it hard for me to care too much about the arguments each of the sides are making because I feel like they're making them with information that I as the viewer do not have.
Well, speaking of not giving us enough foundational information, after the Talos Gaia scene, Fury heads home to confront Vera. In a tense exchange of love, disappointment, and apologies, the two fire guns at each other simultaneously, and both of them purposefully miss. The two of them part ways, with Vera asking if Fury would have loved her if they'd been together in her original form. Guess we'll never know, he says. Let's pause for a moment, talk about the Vera situation. This feels like the biggest missed opportunity of the show for me because it's like I think
Absolutely.
these two actors have such great chemistry together, and it's like, oh man, like what would it have been like to be married to Nick Fury for decades, where like he's trying to save the world, he's married to a scroll, like why did he want to marry a scroll in the first place, and like was it just because she liked Raymond Carver poems, like all this stuff, and it's like there's all these like rich questions there, so that at the end when it's like first of all, we barely even understand why Vera needs to kill Nick Fury, as far as I can tell, right? Like,
Right.
um, Rhodes as a scroll, apparently she's like working for Gravik, or like Gravik has her under control. Rhodes is working for Gravik too. Rhodes orders her to kill Nick Fury, right? And it's like, okay, I guess I can fill in some bit of a backstory there about like why she's involved with Gravik and stuff. Um, but like, how long back did that go? She's been with Nick Fury for decades now. So did she just recently? Anyway, whatever. So I'm not going to put more thought into it than the show. So then,
Mhm.
so then it's like, okay, so then she needs to decide whether or not to kill this person that she's been with. It honestly reminded me. I brought this example up a couple times recently. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. You're
Mhm.
introduced to Ray Winstone's character in like one of the opening scenes of the film, and literally 10 minutes later, he betrays Indiana Jones. And that betrayal has no emotional impact at all because you just met this guy. Like, why do you care if they? It'd be like it would be different if like they brought Short Round back and then Short Round betrayed it, and it's like, oh wow, they've known each other for decades and we saw that before. Like um, but we just met this guy, and similarly, I feel like we just met Vara like a couple episodes ago. We've gotten snapshots of her relationship with Fury, but it left me more confused than really feel like it left me more like, what am I supposed to feel about Vera than feeling like, oh wow, what a big moment that Vera chooses not to kill Nick Fury. What did you think, Patrick?
Well, in many ways, we've just met Fury, right? Like it's called Secret Invasion, but it
Yeah.
is it is really a Nick Fury show. Like Nick Fury has been just a chessboard piece, like
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah.
the Marvel franchise. Like is just been like it's someone who gets the Avengers in the places they need to be to do the things that they need to do. And Samuel Jackson, by pure gravitas, is able to just imbue that with like a lot of weight because that's what comes with casting an actor like Samuel L. Jackson that sort of like imparts more than what is actually written into the
Right.
character and depicted on screen. And here, like, man, it's so easy to imagine. Like, and they even set up the structure with the scene in the cafe with the poem where he's coming off like the Battle of New York. And like there's a newspaper referencing it, and they kind of like playfully talk about his like maybe or
Yeah.
maybe not involvement. And it's so easy to imagine like a 40-minute episode that is just him walking in the door after being part of some world altering event, and they playfully talk about it or don't, and then just go on with their lives. And this is like his rest stop in between him constantly being involved in plots involving saving the world slash universe. And the idea that you could just do 3 or 4 of those and like have these moments with these characters where he's able to decompress, talk about all the stress of his job, and give some interiority to this character and the weight that they must carry with the job that they have. And it's like you get it all bottled up in this one moment, and then the show crumples it up in the trash and goes like almost like it's an idea in a writer's room. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, that was nice.
What's
Time to
so
move on.
what's so odd to me is the people who made the show seem to understand
Yeah.
we need to know what their relationship was like. So they get that we can't just have Vara betraying Nick Fury like right out the gate. Because if they did, then so that's like, okay, so we're gonna give you some flashbacks, but it's like, all right, I appreciate that you understood we needed more than nothing, but I don't know that the flashbacks are quite enough. The flashbacks and the little present day stuff we get, I don't know that that's quite enough to establish like,
It's because
hey,
the relationship is so complex. It is not a
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's more than just a relationship that is built on like someone assuming the identity of someone else, right? We get the reveal
right.
of
Which
the
that is like a really
backstory.
cool idea, you know.
Absolutely. I loved that. Was what that is probably in a show that like doesn't have a ton of things that you would sit with and think about,
Yeah,
like that whole notion of why she assumed that identity, how like she assumed responsibility for like the idea of like being a daughter to parents
yeah,
and
yeah.
living that life. That's
You find out that Vara took someone else's identity, basically, like
Mhm.
somebody else who was dying. The thing that I didn't get was she's like, she made me 3 promises, and one of them was not to hurt you, Nick Fury. And I was like,
Yeah.
what? Like,
Why does
did
she
the
care?
dying did the dying woman know Nick Fury? Like, what was up? What's going on there? You know. Anyway,
I mean, she
like
did say.
maybe
I mean, promise one was to fall in love, right?
Vara probably explained like who Nick Fury
Mhm.
was, but I was like, why would dying woman who Nick Fury has never met care about Nick Fury? Also, Nick Fury was like has said on the show like, "Oh, I never was going to ask you." So he knew that it was a possibility that maybe she just took someone else's identity that wasn't dying, or like, which is its own weird thing. Anyway, go ahead, Patrick. What were you going to say?
Well, it's just that you have that layer of like assuming the identity of another person, which obviously we
Yeah.
only get the inklings of, has clearly weighed on Vara. Like she is her true self when Fury is gone. He walks in the door. She transforms into this what did Fury fall in love with? Fall in love with all like attraction is some mixture of physical, emotional, psychological, and because of the nature of the scrolls, that like untangles like presents something like really interesting. Like, do we really think they've never talked about like the transformation or her relationship with
Hmm.
that skin in that body? Like, I have to imagine that has come up, and they allude to that at the end, and it's just like that's just such rich material for something that is, yes, it's like goofy shape shifting aliens, but then oh right, like there's actually a needle to thread here to say something really fascinating about the human condition and how we have relationships with one another that are like beyond just physical attraction, but what
Right.
layer does that present? And the show has an opportunity to play with that, and gives it so little space.
And what are the role like what are the ways in which we shapeshift for the loved ones around us and play a
Right.
specific role for them, and if they love that version of us, do they really love us, and so on. But to quote Nick Fury, guess we'll never know.
Guess we'll never know. And that, oh god, in so many ways it felt like, I feel like a lot of the conversations we've had about these first 4 episodes is looking at moments and wondering, will the show recognize what it has here
Hmm.
and build a show around that,
Yeah.
or more fully around that?
Right, but we're two
And,
thirds of the way through, and it seems
well,
increasingly
it
unlikely now, right?
increasingly unlikely, I'd be so curious to know how much of this tension existed in the conceptualization of the
Right.
show. Like, there's too many smart ideas like
Hmm.
buried under the stuff that doesn't work. I was like, well, people like, shows are complex. Like getting a show made in the Marvel machine is like, I'm sure even an even bigger layer of complexity. And the shows do not seem to have any of the level of the sort of authorship that like is granted sometimes to like the bigger productions, like a Ryan Coogler gets on a Black Panther and a James Gunn gets on a Guardians, where you're in the machine, but you can see the authorship there, and it really feels like so much of the television show is way more Feige to like to be too like
Right, like we have to get back to Gravik's next terrorist plan,
right,
basically.
and it feels like the way you like Gunn talks about how he writes his scripts and works within like the ask that he's getting from the greater Marvel universe is like he finds a way to meet. I just feels like this is way more like comic book nerd Kevin Feige like conceptualized on screen, and it's like whoa, what's missing in these television shows, even as hard as it is to get that balance in the movies, like is a lot of that. What is the voice of somebody here? And I feel like you can see that voice in those conversations. And then when Fury walks out the door, the show that I wanted this show to be is also walking out the door as well. And maybe it can still be like a fun romp at the end. Like that's what I'm hoping for. But
Mm.
the more emotionally grounded, like insightful look, I don't think that show is going to exist in episodes 5 and 6.
Hey man, don't give up hope quite yet, because we're getting to the best sequence of the last few episodes. Fury heads to another confrontation with Skrull Rhodes. I like how Caroline Sita over at Episodic Medium wrote about this. She called him Scrody.
No! Boo!
We're
But
calling him
also,
we're calling him
that's
Scrodes. We're
all right.
calling
We're
him
down.
Scrodes. Okay,
No.
it's a
Okay.
rule.
All right.
He's Scrodes.
Don't break every time I say it.
Fury heads
Scrody.
to another
Scrody.
confrontation with Scrodes under the guise of making peace. In reality, Fury slips him a drink with a tracking device, which leads them to the planned attack on the president's convoy. Gravik unveils his new Groot-infused Super Scroll powers, but the assassination fails and the president is rescued. In a bloody fight, Talos is severely injured and then eventually shot point blank by Gravik. Fury leaves the scene with the president, presuming Talos is now dead. So that brings us to the end of the episode. Gotta say, I think in general the show actually looks pretty good.
Yeah, it
I
does.
think like the cinematography. I think Eben Bolter is one of the cinematographers, a Filmcast listener, if I'm not mistaken. It
Ooh.
did some of the cinematography. Also worked on The Last of Us. Very talented guy. I
Mhm.
think a lot of the show looks great. Um, I think the attack on the president's convoy. Yes, it's like a little bit silly because you know. Uh, in real life, I don't know that it would be quote unquote this easy to attack the president's convoy. They
Yeah.
generally like clear the airspace or whatever, but scrolls have people everywhere, so whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
Uh, and I think the president would have much more backup and all that stuff. Like, if you've ever been in a city where the president visits, it's like generally a larger convoy than the one you see here, right?
It grinds your city to a halt with
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Which I understand why they needed to have it like in the middle of nowhere because that makes it more plausible. But I
Sure.
thought overall they did a pretty good job. Like the action is like pretty good. It's a little bit silly, but overall I thought this is like the strongest action scene we've had in the show so far. How did it work for you, Patrick Klepek?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I the kind of the less showy but more set piecey moment is obviously Talos trying to break through the bulletproof glass while
That was cool. Like the idea that he's like physically
yes,
transforming and people are like they might kill him because they think he's a bad guy. That was like a nice tense
it
moment,
was
I thought.
it
Yeah.
yeah it granted, even if like broadly speaking I was like I'm not really worried about the president, like like I'm not really worried
Right.
about graphics
Right.
going after, but like again like it's in many of these films like you know that the heroes are going to solve the macro problem by the end, and so what makes them work or not work is like the tension in the moment. It's these micro problems along the way. It's the and that one like felt tense and looked cool. Like it was the aesthetic working with the situation to produce anxiety out of the audience. And like watching him attempt to muster enough energy to break through this powerful glass while slipping away like this mask was really great, because up until this moment the show more or less doesn't play with the notion of the power being it's more of a light switch. It's on, it's off. We don't get a sense of,
Right.
is this something they are active, like, you know, you don't think about breathing
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
think, but then when you think about breathing, it feels really weird to think about breathing. How does their power work? Is it like that where when it's working, it just switches and it's just on, and you can just go about your day in this new form. But the moment you're injured and you have to think about it, it gets like you have a much more complicated relationship with what is for them like a basic bodily function
Right.
slash feature, and seeing that manifested in a storytelling element and in terms of what you're looking at, like was fantastic. Like it made me wish there were more moments like that in the show.
It was very cool. I think of it like flexing a muscle, Patrick. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe it's like they're flexing a muscle at all times, um, and they've just gotten really good at it. So Gravik kills Talos at the end of the episode, and
Does he?
we will
Huh?
find out. We will find out if it actually is true. I think you're right. If this is the end for Talos, kind of a bummer. I guess the idea is that he died like an idealistic scroll, right? Like he's an
I do think
idealistic
he's
thing.
dead.
Yeah. Sorry, did you say that makes you think he's dead?
I do think he's dead. I
Yeah.
I, I think that the shot gave a more of a sense of gravity than when Gaia went down.
It would be pretty weird to have like the Gaia reveal and then have another Talos reveal. Like that just would be weird.
Yeah.
At the same time, but here's the thing: I just said that, and at
Mhm.
the same time, we've seen 4 episodes of Secret Invasion, and in 3 out of the 4 episodes, Gravik ends the episode by killing a major character.
Right, right, and
so,
again that the chaos man, he just loves it. He just lives it. He just can't
so,
get enough of it.
so I'm not putting it past the show to do something repetitive, is what I'm saying. Like maybe it's like, aha, Talos is actually alive. Maybe Ben Mendelsohn was like, the only condition under which I'll join the show is if you kill me by episode 5. Um,
Ah, no, see, he doesn't seem like it's why I appreciated his work in The Outsider, because there are actors that I think come into worlds like this, and I think you can kind of speak to comic book movies as their own sort of genre, like genre work. And some of them come into it because they want to like it's good money, or they want to be in films that their kids can see. But like because of The Outsider, like that's why I was excited when he was in Captain Marvel, and then in this, it's like he seems like he's game for it. Like some people are
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
there
yeah.
and
I'm
can't
being
speak.
I'm being facetious. I'm being
Yeah,
facetious. Like yeah.
I guess I'm sad.
You want to defend Ben Mendelsohn's honor, and
Well,
I
not only
understand that.
defend, but also like like you want to give up, may come up with it. I'm giving the show an out. You want to come up with an excuse to bring Ben Mendelsohn back up. I'm not
Mhm.
going to be complaining too hard. You can take like there's not much tension to work with to begin with. If you give me a couple more scenes with Ben Mendelsohn, I'm not going to be sobbing.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So that's the episode. Those are the 2 episodes, and I think like yeah, I appreciated the action beats from episode 4. Like pretty strong action scene, nice conversation between Scrodes and Nick Fury. Like there's some good stuff. There's some good stuff there. But yeah, a lot of missed opportunities, and a lot of times it feels like the show is playing with elements it doesn't fully comprehend or doesn't want to explore further. Patrick Klepek, any other topics or thoughts you want to bring up before we wrap up today?
No, even some of the other ones I was thinking of bringing up, we ended up
Yeah, we
kind
ended
of
up kind of
talking.
covering it through our main
Yeah,
conversation.
through our
So
main conversation. I mean, one that we that occurred to me in watching this, and I think you and I were messaging about it, was this show, unlike I think a She-Hulk or a WandaVision, like doesn't really fully embrace or understand the episodic advantage of television. Like episodic is a format. It is not, and we've seen a lot of this in I'm sure you've covered a lot of this in your work, where frequently it feels like you're getting movie scripts turned into television because television is where the money is, and then you feel like you're just watching a movie chopped up into parts. And even though this
excuse me, Patrick, did you not hear the part where I said Gravik kills someone at the end of each episode?
excuse me, David. I'm
that's the
sorry. I'm
that's the
sorry.
structure. That's the structure of the show. Every episode, Gravik has a terrorist plot, and then by the end of the episode, he kills a major character. That's if anything, it's the most procedural out of any of the
I
Marvel
guess
shows.
I guess you're right. And in that regard, you are correct. But it just, whereas like in a WandaVision, it's like, okay, we're moving through time in each of the
Yes,
episodes.
yes,
And in She-Hulk, it was a comedy, and that was like sort of a bit of the week that she
right,
was working through. And I
right.
however you feel about that show, I think it understood the format. And there's nothing about
Agreed, agreed.
She-Hulk as a show that I think would have been better served by it being a movie for the story it was telling. And we're here, it very much feels if they were going to go the television route, I wish they had been more experimental, as we've talked, and gone the more play like feel, like go more conversational, go be a little bolder with the structural swing that TV brings you. Whereas I feel like by the end, we're going to get 6 episodes that, yeah, sure, it turns into 4.5 hours of stuff to watch or whatever. But could it have been like a 2 hour and 15-minute movie? Like, probably, and still accomplished much of what it's trying to do, which maybe is really just getting Fury to a place for the Marvels. And like that will be a bummer use of this show if it ends up just being a chess piece move, given that at some point Samuel Jackson is not, like, he seems game to do this as long as like Marvel will have him. So maybe we're not at risk of losing him like we've lost some other actors, because he's not doing a ton of the action, and he finds it cool to be this character. But I don't know that we're going to get many more showcases for Samuel L. Jackson, and that's where the bummer part comes for me as I look forward to the next 2 episodes. I hope we still get some moments with him, because even if he's still going to be in this universe, it does feel like this is like kind of the get good, like kind of like the Black Widow movie was for Scarlett Johansson, which is like, hey, finally we're gonna do a highlight piece for you. And Marvel's, I don't think, has shown that they're particularly great at delivering on that when they finally do get around to giving what could be showcase moments for some of the bigger actors in their universe.
Mm-hmm. I think it's actually a best case scenario if this ends up impacting the Marvels in any way, because if you think about some of the other shows, like WandaVision, I remember watching WandaVision and being like, wow, I bet this is going to be a big part of the next thing. And literally it's dismissed with like one line in Multiverse of Madness. What's his name? Doctor Strange shows up and she's like, oh, are you here about the thing?
I'm trying to bring my kids from an
Yeah,
interdimensional gate, right?
when
Clearly
I
going to be an important part of the new movie.
yeah,
No.
when I enslaved that whole group of people, is that why you're here to bother me? He's like, no, I have something much more important to talk to you about. He's like, oh, okay, all right, well, in that case, we don't need to talk about that anymore. So I'm worried it's going to be like Captain America or Falcon and Winter Soldier, where like literally I don't like that show has no impact on the arc of Captain America. Like if the next thing you watch, Anthony Mackie is Captain America. If that's what happened, like that's like, oh, that's what happened at the end of Endgame. So
Well,
why would I assume? Why would I assume something different would have happened?
I know. And
so.
then, I don't want to spoil too much about, what's been shown about the Marvels, but the little that has been shown in the trailer, I'm unsure of the timeline of where this fits. Nothing in the trailer necessarily speaks to me that it takes place after this, and that would be disappointing if like the Marvels is before the arc of Secret Invasion.
Patrick Klepek's gonna say, I spent 6 hours watching Secret Invasion and talking.
I would have done it anyway. I can be clear. Like I am, like
for nothing.
I'm a pig in a trough. Like Kevin Feige, like, watch this, okay? I'll do it. Like I get something out of all of these. But I'm also honest about my relationship with them, which I think is, that's me maybe self-justifying. Like, look, if I record these podcasts with Dave, then it's okay that I looked at my phone while watching Secret Invasion. That's fine. I could have watched anything else, but I watched this.
Let's talk about a couple of these comments in the live stream room. But before I do that, I just want to mention again, Patrick Klepek is the host of Remap Radio, the writer of Crossplay, a new Substack that you can find at patrickklepek.substack.com. So be sure to check out Patrick's other work. Be sure to check out all the other stuff we're doing at Decoding TV, podcast.decodingtv.com. We talked about the Emmy nominations with Miles McNutt. We're going to be talking about Justified coming back next week. That's going to be very exciting. And many other things this summer. So be sure to subscribe and become a paid member at decodingtv.com. Get ad-free episodes, early access to episodes, and help to support the show, because I pay all the people I work with, including Patrick, and it's your contributions that keep this podcast running. decodingtv@gmail.com, by the way, is where you can email us and let us know what you thought of our conversation and of Secret Invasion. So before we wrap up, Patrick, let's talk about a couple of these comments in the chat. So yeah, Daniel Falconer in the chat is saying the Marvels was delayed, so I think it probably takes place before Secret Invasion. Very possible, Patrick. Very
Yeah,
possible.
that does seem yeah, there was so much schedule moving around. And whatever, like it's fine. It goes back to an earlier point I think I had made in maybe the intro podcast we had done talking about the show ahead of me having seen it, that I think we will the optimistic case for the future of the MCU is that between the difficulties of figuring out what storytelling to even do post Endgame, which I think is an extremely high bar to clear. In which if they just gone out with that, you couldn't have blamed them. But there was money to be made, and so they keep going, and that's difficult because of the kind of actors that were lost in that transition, and like just where do you pick up the pieces, and then the loss of actors like literally dying that were probably going to be key figures, and then COVID happens, in which the schedule of all of these films has been all over the place. The
Yeah.
optimistic case for the Marvel universe is that we are sort of like plodding along until like the ducks can get in a row again with like like my guiding light for a lot of this is Fantastic Four. I know the X-Men are important, but
Yeah.
Feige himself has said the most important story to him is that family, those characters. And so I would be profoundly worried and then potentially disinterested in the future of this universe if by the time we get to that in like a year and change, they haven't found a way to get this back on track, because it's like how can you do continual storytelling if you can't tell it continually, like I think
Yeah.
even in an order this still wouldn't be fixed. Like if this all came out in the order it was supposed to, closer together, I don't think it solves a lot of the basic storytelling problems, but it's losing one of the main foundational pieces of all of this, is that you watch this and then it helps you care about the next thing, and like so much of that has been lost in
Yeah.
the last couple of years.
I don't think we're gonna. I'm not particularly hopeful, by the way, that that's gonna happen for a variety of reasons. First of all, as Lucky Dog Podcast says on Twitch, Iger said on CNBC that they would be pulling back on Marvel and Star Wars. No surprise after this year in media. He's been saying that for a while, and also
Mhm.
there is a massive writer strike going on right now. And as of this morning, or like by the time you're listening to this, there may be an actor strike happening. Um, and so that is going to be, I think, not as disruptive as COVID, but it was definitely going to be up there in terms of how it impacts the timeline for these things.
But
So,
could the most I feel like the slot there is a direct correlation in the slide of storytelling between when like the treasure box really got opened with television, right? In which in theory it was like, oh, characters that can't would be punished for not being able to carry $1 billion movie, just won't
mhm,
get made. And
right,
that look, if we do it on television, we can introduce them there and
right.
then
We can do
elevate
an
them.
Agatha, the Coven of Chaos on TV, but not necessarily as a
Right.
movie, right?
And I don't think that has gone the way that I don't think that path has worked out particularly well. I think there are exceptions. Like I think Miss Marvel is going to be a star. Like that actor is incredible, and I think she's going to be great in the Marvels, regardless of how that movie is. My guess is
Right.
you will walk out of that film going, "Holy shit!" Like she's great. I wonder if one of the best things that could happen to this whole universe is like, look, just make less of it. Like, make
Mhm,
the ones that come out mean a lot more. Like,
right.
for the creators themselves, make the stakes higher. This movie has to be better. It has to mean more because we only get to make X number of them. And maybe the costs, like the budgets, are literally going to come down as well, forcing you to do potentially different modes of storytelling. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but again, optimistic's case, like because I want this stuff to be as good as how I used to feel about in the past, I do think that is a potential path forward of like, look, maybe having unlimited resources was not the best path for this storytelling, and that actually being asked to do a handful of things as opposed to literally everything it hasn't exactly panned out all that well.
I completely agree. Daniel, by the way, in the chat also says, I like how Scrooge was just casually sitting in his SUV during the attack. gotta say, I'm a sucker for those kinds of scenes in TV shows and films where
Hmm.
like chaos is unfolding around a character, and there's one character that just is not reacting to it. Very creepy, and I think it was pretty well done in the show.
And the scene, we didn't get to talk about it, but all like one of my favorite scenes in the whole show is when he shows up, and I think this shows like what it's like to be in a Skrull adopting a human body.
Yeah.
He clearly drinks Scrooge drinks a shitload of that bourbon, not realizing that that is going to maintain on their breath. And
Uh huh.
then but they also clearly don't, they process alcohol differently because also
Yeah.
the character is not extremely intoxicated. And so when the president is like, what get this man a coffee? Like, what were you doing before this? I thought that was a neat window
Mm.
into the kinds of things the Skrulls have to account for. Um, and also kind of an insight into like how does this function? Because clearly adopting human form does not necessarily mean that you process alcohol in the same way. And so I thought that was a neat little aside about the relationship the Skrulls have with their bodies that is not something the show has spent a lot of time exploring.
Fair points. Final question or final point. This, and again, we're broadcasting live at youtube.com/decoding TV. So be sure to subscribe to get future live notifications. Shareable Texas writes, my mind got tied in knots a bit thinking about whether Talos and Gaia make sense as relatives with their accents. And then I was like, why do Skrulls have accents? How do they have accents?
Well, I mean, accents are sometimes products of environment, right? So I could imagine
Yeah.
if you are
They're
adopting.
traveling around all the world, and I have to say it's so fascinating. I have a nephew and you have kids, Patrick, and it's just like
Mhm.
it's fascinating to kind of try to grok how accents are formed, right? Like
Or
they're formed.
forgotten, right?
Yeah.
Like my wife, she spent a lot of time growing up in Minnesota, and well, she doesn't say anything like, she had that accent when she was growing up there, and
Hmm.
then lost it and adopted more of a generic Midwestern accent, having grown up around, spent a lot of time around Chicago. But when she has had, I don't know what the line is. I don't think it's half a bottle of bourbon like in this show, but a certain amount to drink, she will say the word "house," and she's not slurring. She is
What
just slipping back
what's how
in.
is what is that? What is
It
that?
is just a Minnesotan way of saying like a house. It is just a
Oh,
regional.
okay.
It is a regional accent to her that is buried beneath the surface, and that
Yeah.
when she's had a little bit to drink, it can kind of slip up, like it is
Yeah.
just resting beneath the surface. And so I also find the relationship with accents to be interesting, especially because they're not, they can be permanent, but are not always permanent, depending on like when it
Yeah.
intersects
And
with your life.
how severe, how significant the accent is, right?
Right, right.
Um I remember there is this movie called The Imposter. Do you ever see that movie, The Imposter?
Mm-mm.
It's one of my favorite movies of all time. The Imposter is. It's a documentary about this child who vanished, right? And they don't know what happened to this kid. This child vanished. Then decades later, somebody comes back and they say, "I am the child. I'm the child who vanished." Um, Spoiler alert: the movie's called The Imposter. He's not the child. And he has an extremely thick accent. And they talked with like linguistic specialists, and they said like, there's no way that a child who grew up to the age of blah and didn't have an accent could then later develop an accent this like this. And I thought
Uh-huh.
that was really interesting. Like basically, it's the
Hmm.
first few years that are critical, and it's basically really hard to undo if once you develop one. So anyway, some musings on accents for you, Shareable Texas, which I think is it's the eve of Shareable Texas's birthday. So happy birthday
Oh, happy
there
birthday.
in the near if I recall seeing that correctly. All right, that's it for today. We'll be back in 2 weeks with our conversation about Secret Invasion episodes 5 and 6. We'll also be doing weekly recaps of Justified in the near future. So yeah, that's what you have to look forward to here on Decoding TV and much more. Patrick Klepek, thanks for chatting today.
Thanks for having me.